Welcome back. You're listening to Conservative Conversations with Tom Saruf. I'm very excited for my guest today, Bobby Angel, who is an author, speaker, and leader of Catholic ministry, perhaps most famously known for his YouTube videos with his wife Jackie for Ascension Ministries. And he's the author of a number of books, including most recently The Postmodern Predicament, which is the main subject of our episode today, where we focus on what postmodernism is, where it fits into the history of philosophy, how it manifests itself into our lives, and what to do about it. We hope you enjoy the episode.
Join the best in the movement. It's Conservative Conversations with ISI, educating for liberty since 1953.
Bobby Angel, welcome to Conservative Conversations. Thanks for joining me.
Hey, thank you so much for having me here.
Can you tell us a little bit about who you are for people who don't know?
Sure. I'm a husband and a father of 5, and I born and raised in Florida, and I live in Texas now. I was a high school teacher and campus minister at an all-boys Catholic high school in California for about 10 years, and briefly after college, I did my undergraduate at the University of Florida. I was discerning the priesthood. I grew up Catholic, and that's been my faith journey, and ran away from God for a good amount of years, but ended up considering spending 3 years in priestly formation before I ultimately felt the call to marriage. And my wife and I have been blessed to be doing ministry around the world and online for a number of years. And we've written a couple books together, and I'm excited to be here and break open the latest one.
Hey there, listener. I wanted to take a quick moment to thank you for listening to Conservative Conversations. This podcast is a production of the Intercollegiate Studies Institute, and our mission here at ISI is educating for liberty. If you'd like to join us in fulfilling our mission, consider helping us by rating and reviewing this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen, to help us reach more listeners like yourself. Now, back to the show. Absolutely, and we're talking about primarily the postmodern predicament, which will be, as of this recording, it'll be out in about a week, I think. And so by the time this comes out, it'll be out, so listeners go buy the book and read it. But Bobby, we'll try and give them a taste of what it is. Can we start with a definition of what is postmodernism?
Sure. So postmodernism is this time period that we're living in the history of philosophy. So I am grateful for my seminary professors and other teachers along the way who have helped me make sense of philosophy. And I really wrote this book for people that don't care about philosophy, for people that don't have time. They just want to know, how do we get here and what do we do about it? And when I taught high school, I mostly did theology, but towards the end of my teaching career, I taught philosophy to the seniors. So trying to make philosophy matter to 17 and 18-year-olds was a fun challenge. That's where I really cut my teeth on trying to present these ideas. And if you look at the history of philosophy, broadly speaking, these 4 time periods of ancient philosophy, so this is where you get Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, and others. The medieval time, where you've got Augustine and Aquinas. You have the modern time period, where you've got the Enlightenment, and you've got Hobbes, and you've got Descartes, and Hume, and all these other characters. And where we are today is postmodernity. So Nietzsche, roughly, onward, in this really reactionary era against all that was presented to us as this is how we know what truth is, this is what we know we can empirically test and find valid. And it's this really fluid, messy period of time where we don't have we're questioning everything. Every arch narrative, every story of our country's origins, all of our heroes, everything is looked at with a skeptical eye. And so what the book is really a pastoral take. It's not about throwing stones or trying to reclaim the past, because we can't put a genie back in the bottle. We can stand on the shoulders of those who came before us to make sense of it, and also honor, like, hey, not everything we're living in is bad, but the first step is kind of diagnosing the problem. Like, why do people feel so adrift today? Why do people feel this anxiousness that generations before us never knew? It's all connected. Like, the ideas that underlie our culture have consequences.
I'm curious what separates the modern from the postmodern in terms of there's narrative building or narrative deconstructing,
Hmm.
um, and Nietzsche is a big part of that. He levels, withering critiques against Christianity, against Hegel, and modernism, and a lot of the sort of political currents of liberalism and equality and things like that. But there was, of course, a lot of skepticism in modern philosophy as well. So could you tease apart more the difference between those two things?
Yeah, the modern aim was this optimism of we can, it's kind of this teenage rebellion in a way of now we've been given all these tools and the sciences, and we can now just walk unfettered. Like, let's slowly slough off the religious overtones of the past to just kind of have this unbridled humanism and forward progress towards utopia. And so there was a sense of it's always going up. And then you had the 20th century, which is one of the bloodiest in world history. And out of those wars, out of the genocides, out of the nuclear warfare that was beginning to become realized, like, oh, we don't have it all together. It hasn't been this unending walk towards utopia. So there's, starting in the 19 kind of 20s and 30s, you kind of have this ennui, this meh, this, and by the Second World War, definitely this just heavy jadedness and sense of like maybe we're not really progressing. Maybe this is all there is, and a profound distrust in everything that's come before. So our leadership, our church authority, the stories we've been told. So if modernity, there's similarities, but there's the sense of going up, and the postmodern spirit is just kind of given up. Like all we have is just whatever we make of it, and this is why you hear all over the place, well, that's your truth versus my truth, and so we become the arbiters of truth. In modernity, there was still a sense of discovering what is true, like what is out there, which is why there is such a sense of exploration and pioneering and wanting to discover all that can be discovered. Now, in a really unfettered kind of like doing violence to the world kind of way at times. But there was a goodness in going out and discovering. And our time period now is just kind of a who cares?
That makes sense. So it's more nihilistic and existential in the sense of, there is no set purpose to things. We're kind of, floating on the top of an ocean that doesn't really care about us.
Yeah. So that trickles down. Like these, and Nietzsche, I had a seminary professor who very much treated Nietzsche like a John the Baptist prophet type. Like he is a herald of what is already happening, and that is a society that is living as practical atheists. Look at all our advances, look at our achievements. We don't really need God anymore. And Nietzsche's the one to just kind of name it. And he's not, you have nihilists that like to claim Nietzsche as their like edgy t-shirt, God is dead, bro. When you read it, it's really it's tragic is what he's saying. Is God is dead and we have killed him. And then if you live that out to its final stopping point, it ends in despair. Like the superficial reading of that is a hedonism. It's like, sweet, just party and do whatever you want and there's no consequences. And even the Russian author Dostoevsky talked about this. Like, that's terrible. If God truly does not exist, maybe there's a juvenile delight in casting off that big brother as I perceive God to be, if that's how I perceive him. But you fixate on that, on a cosmos that's meaningless, on the fact that there is no great purpose or meaning in my life, then the end road is despair, which is what Nietzsche succumbed to.
Right. I had someone point out, it must have been a professor, that Nietzsche never actually proved that God didn't exist or sought even to prove, but just asserted the thing as almost like a sociological observation. And then a lot of his work is trying to unpack what that means and then even go back into the history of philosophy, which thinking about this sort of connection of these other periods that you mentioned, what's the interface between postmodern philosophy and say the classics? I know Nietzsche focuses a lot on, the pre-Socratics and Socrates. So could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so some of the postmodern philosophers dare to go back to some of these sources and draw out some of the themes. But largely there is just kind of a blank check of it's ours now. There's a spirit of it's up to us to define what the text actually means. Like you mentioned deconstruction earlier, and that's a theme that really emerges firstly to texts. When you've got Derrida and Foucault, these French philosophers who are some of the most, we'll say, extreme postmodern examples of let's just continue taking apart the framework of the house and saying, well, actually, um, Melville didn't really like he wrote Moby Dick in a certain way, but I can interpret it whatever I want. Or, Dickens wrote Tale of Two Cities or A Christmas Carol, but I'm going to reread it in the way that I want to reread it. So it's no longer about what is the author's original take, it's how does it apply to me and what do I want it to say? And so what starts as a textual critique of some of the older classics or great books quickly becomes since there is no truth, which is part of the part that is baked into the cake of the deconstructive method is that there is no truth. So this is how my starting point from how I'm going to look at the text. But then that gets extrapolated to the whole of, well, what about societies? And what about countries? And what about even the human person? If my methodology is there is no truth, then it's a hop, skip, and jump to, well, male and female then can be whatever I declare them to be. And so all these ideas that we're seeing come to fruition today, they have their, like you follow the stem of the plant. It goes down to some of these ideas. And so I've talked to many friends over the last several years that were just so confused. How did our culture and society get to this point where like even the basics of biology are now under question? And it's like, well, it's been a long time coming. And the thing is, though, and what I wanted to also end the book in is a sense of hope. Because there's a lot of great philosophy books, there's a lot of great books explaining postmodernism out there, but they don't always tell you, well, what do we do about it? Like what comes, like what are some practical things to do next? And that's what I had hoped to do was help the the non-philosophers understand how we got here. What are some of the tenets of postmodernism, and then what do we do about it?
Well, I definitely want to get into the roadmap for recovery, I think is the subtitle, part of the subtitle. But before we do that, I want to get a little bit of a better sense or a more concrete sense of like, what does this look like in our lives? So you mentioned the sort of male female is, it's not true. It's just a narrative. It's a function of power, let's say, and we can
Yeah,
make it what we want it to be. So that makes sense. Or kind of how literary theory, we can, authors don't make meaning, but the reader kind of decides what the meaning of the book is. What are some other examples that would explain or demonstrate, this thing that is confusing me or is a function of our lives is a function or a consequence of the premises of postmodernism sort of just playing out in real time?
sure. Art and architecture is a chapter I get into, and that was one of the fastest ways when I taught high schoolers. Like, how do you get them to care or at least observe why ideas matter? Is show them art from the Renaissance or the Gothic cathedrals and show them architecture of today and artwork in the last 100 years, where sometimes it's literally, as we know, just dots on a page or a urinal in a museum, and it's called art. And like, what happened? It's not just fads change and fashions come and go. There's something has happened when you look at different cultures and or spots in Europe, where even like just the fixtures like lampposts and mailboxes were beautiful. Like there was an ornateness to it. But now everything is about function. Now everything, you look at the Soviet period of this, the pure brutalism of their architecture, it was designed to suck your soul away. And so the modern office building with the fluorescent lights and it's designed to make you feel like you're just a widget, like you're just a cog in the machine. Like that is part of its design. So it's helping to see like what are the ideas that undergird our culture, and is it that the human person is endowed with dignity and worth? And if so, then our art reflects it, and our architecture is something that is meant to delight. It's not just about what is useful or what is most cost effective. You think about some of these ancient churches, like the benefactors that poured resources into it, sometimes knowing I'm not going to see this in my lifetime. Like I'm doing this for my kids and my grandchildren and the culture at large. And so there was an investment in these buildings that were beautiful, civic buildings too, for the sake of drawing us upward into what is beautiful, what is good and true, and how I should act according to my dignity as a human person. And that comes out of the Judeo-Christian worldview, that you are made in the image and likeness of God. So art and architecture will reflect that. And if you take philosophy at an undergraduate course, it largely goes like the sequence will go the ancients, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, and then this big old 1500-year leap, like nothing happened. It's just the pejorative Dark Ages, where the evil church is squandering resources and keeping people illiterate, and it's like, listen. And then we finally the Enlightenment and Descartes and science, onward. But it is so myopic. And because of my years in seminary, I was really given that full puzzle piece, that full like picture of listen, in that time period of the medievals, the philosophy was so ingrained with the theology. Like you couldn't fully separate it, because out of the emergence of Christianity, you start to have this explicitly named understanding of the dignity of the person. Therefore, we should probably save the human person. We should educate. So you have the rise of universities in this medieval time period. You have the rise of hospitals. You have, as the barbarian hordes are dismantling Europe, Irish monks keeping alive the works of the classics of Aristotle, helping, which gradually will go back out to Europe to help teach people again, teach people how to read, teach people to, bit by bit reclaim like the goodness of what's been handed to us. So to look at this stuff is so intertwined often with faith, and we can't just totally kind of box it out without doing violence to ourselves and the story and the culture that we've inherited. So now you look at, why do we feel so aimless? Why, if we're given just a purely materialistic, hedonistic, just do what feels good, just get on this conveyor belt of high school to college to job to, and that's all there is to life? Well, art and architecture is going to reflect that too. And likewise, there's a lot of art like Dali that is in this surrealistic way, kind of showing you what's in the water, this sense of meaninglessness. Like it's not just all gibberish. It really is presenting kind of the angst of the atomic age.
That makes sense. My girlfriend is an art historian, so she tries to explain to me, like, yes, postmodernism is kind of ridiculous, but there's something to it in the sense of like it's an explanation of the time period in which they find themselves. Like this, it's a reflection of ideas. It's not just. I don't think it's purely just here's $15 million. Give me $15 million. I'm going to draw a little red square.
Or tape a banana to the wall.
Yeah, exactly. Has religion embraced postmodernism, or is postmodernism maybe infected? I don't know if that's exactly the right word. Religion, either our sort of psychological or sort of intellectual understanding of what religion is and what it's for, or even the theology itself.
It's some of the thinking has definitely seeped into some of the theologies. And now, being Catholic, I'm grateful to have a magisterium that is very clear and articulate. Like, we have a catechism that says what we believe, and it can't be changed on a whim or by a committee. But you see a lot of, this is this kind of what's the culture of the age right now, and wanting to appeal to people, and so wanting to be open to take in some of these ideas, but often at your detriment, because we mentioned deconstruction earlier. That's another big reason why I wrote the book, because I saw a lot of Christian friends, former students even, drifting into this methodology of, it's good to ask questions. It is good to ask questions of your faith. It is, as a Catholic, even, like, we need to ask questions. I had a priest professor who said, Jesus came to take away your sin, not your brain. And like, God can handle our big questions. And yet when you have, and a lot of this makes sense too, like, if we're living in a time period where there is just this default cynicism or question of authority, like, how do I really know anyone is speaking the truth here? If there's been a lot of abuse, if there's been cases of authority mishandled, of, people genuinely are hurt, I totally understand why someone is going to go and go down some of these rabbit holes. And you've got the rise of the internet, you got the rise of these influencers and people that, want to have space together to grieve and to process. My thing is, caked into the methodology of deconstruction, though, is the premise that there is no truth. So if you're trying to reconstruct a worldview that is based on something you can anchor yourself to, and as a Christian, if you're trying to follow Jesus, who is the way, the truth, and the life, but your toolkit says there's no truth, then it's going to be all opinions. It's just going to be, well, my Jesus would let me do this, this, this. Like, and there's no deeper undergirding to say otherwise. Like, there's no anchor point. So there are definitely some different churches, different different groups that have absorbed more or less of some of this thinking, including just the architecture. There's many buildings you go into today, you think you wouldn't be able to say this is a church. And Catholicism too. I've seen some really ugly churches around the world. And so when you walk into a beautiful church, it is something that takes your breath away. It is something that is very clear of this, the education of the art. You said a moment ago, like, art reflects the culture. It also educates the culture. The law is the same kind of thing.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And so there's this kind of give and take, this dance there, and I've seen more churches either going through some kind of overhaul, like, we're going to revamp things and make it more objectively beautiful, or just brand new churches being designed today with the beautiful in mind, not just to kind of have a flat horizontal, this looks like an assembly hall or rock concert. Like, showing you, like, the building and the art does matter. And so here too is, like, when you start to imbibe some of these postmodern ideas, don't be surprised when the fruit of it comes along, including I had a chapter in the book called Everything is Marxist. And this was it's a bit tongue in cheek, but it's also true, just in that manner of how it's gone beyond economics. It really has been this mutation of Marx's idea of seeing the whole world through this paradigm of oppressed and oppressor, and how that has, like, morphed into all these different arenas, whether it is approaching racism, whether it's approaching the climate. And young people especially, they need a purpose and they need a mission. And if they're not given any kind of pride in their country or overarching, why am I here? Then we're going to gravitate to some of these, well, I'm going to put my energy into this with religious fervor. And so that's what I also want to explain in the book, or just name, is to say, listen, it makes sense. I'm not saying it's okay. I'm not saying these ideas are great. I'm saying understand where that impulse to make a change, to make your life have meaning, like where does that come from, and why we feel like that's not being met elsewhere, and which makes some of these ideas very attractive.
Yeah, well, if so, you and I were sitting here in 2025, and we're living in I'm going to say, the morass of postmodernism. Uh, Tell us about sort of the roadmap to recovery, living within and among this without losing ourselves to it. I don't know if you give anything in the book towards trying to like defeat or have a sort of a counter movement against postmodernism and ultimately defeating it, or if it's more of a here's how to survive and kind of like ride out the storm.
Yes, I subtitled the book a roadmap for recovery. It's not the roadmap. It's not a silver bullet. And a lot of this stuff is kind of common sense. I think to the extent some of these are just faulty ideas about the human person, they're going to fall flat. And they're going to, as we're kind of seeing, some of these ideas, they try to steamroll to the extent we allow them. But they also run out of steam. And you see, like, after all said and done, like, they don't last. So part of it is weathering the storm. Part of it is speaking out and being willing to call a spade and stand for what is true. We live in an age, too, where there's perhaps always a silent majority that just wants to be left alone and live our lives. And some people, because of their circumstances or what the position they're in, get thrown into the spotlight because they just didn't succumb. They decided to say, no, this is not okay. This idea is not right. And all of a sudden get a following because a lot of people agree with them. So some of it is just having the courage to weather the storm and call out some of these bad ideas. And so as a Christian, I also try to write the book and make my argument in a pastoral way of, we have to love people. We can criticize ideas, and we should, especially if they're doing harm and leading people to like despair or really like some dangerous paths of like, bodily mutilation or just like the heartbreaking scenarios of what people are falling into. But so to love people, even while calling out some of these bad ideas, like that's got to be part of the equation there. Like not everything the postmodern period we're living in is bad on its own. I do think there is strength to looking at the narratives of things, of revisiting, hey, maybe not all the stories of the past are told. And again, we do awful at staying in the middle. We tend to swing to these extremes where now it's like, well, now we need to topple all of our heroes and take down all these statues and rewrite the whole American history. It's like, listen, no. Like, we're going too far. I think we can approach with nuance these figures of history who sometimes we're so quick to judge and yet realize, people 10 years from now are going to look at us maybe the same way. So to have some kind of compassion and mercy and recognize, like, what did this person do right? Like we can canonize the saints and, worship the Lord Jesus Christ. Everyone else is imperfect. Everyone else has fallen short. Everyone else is trying to like make some contribution. And so we can honor that and look at some of these stories with nuance and listen to the stories of others. Like if the modern time period was so focused on the objective, the postmodern time period is so obsessed with the subjective. It just doesn't care about what is out there, what is true. It's all about me. Like, camera back on me, let's put the spotlight back on me. And it's like, well, I think we can have nuance. We can honor your experience. What have you been through? How have you suffered in life? But also keep a foot in the objective. Now, what does it mean to flourish as a man or woman? Does your life have meaning? Let's reclaim that. Let's find the purpose, however small, in the day-to-day. One of my favorite books that I would gift students was Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, Austrian psychologist who survived Auschwitz and wrote about his experience and never lost his humanity. and just talked about, listen, we may not be able to choose our historical circumstances or what the cards that have been dealt to us are, but we can absolutely choose our response to it. I can choose how I react and my attitude towards what's been handed to me. So with the postmodern stuff, it's easy to just kind of just go on attack mode, call everyone idiots, just get clickbait, make everything outrage, and yet we're called to play the long game and to love. And love does not mean being nice, by the way. It's not about being nice guys. It's about, like, love is willing the good for the other, as Aquinas would say. So it means I want the best for you. I mean, it's willing to call a spade in charity. I'm not doing this to destroy you. I am doing this to lift you up, which ultimately lifts me up. I talk in the book too about reclaiming beauty, and we've talked a little bit about that already with our art and our architecture and investing in that. And also wonder. Aristotle wrote long ago, and actually this may have been Socrates that Plato wrote down, but that, knowledge begins in wonder. And we're, thank God for the devices we have, for the technologies we have, but it's just so easy to kind of stay in that culture of meh if I'm just doom scrolling all day, if I'm feeling overloaded by the digital. And one of the best antidotes is just to get your feet on the ground again. Like find a park, take a walk out in nature, leave the phone behind, and just be and experience what's going on around you. Like, this is how you anchor yourself back into the objective. And there's a whole other hour we could talk about, like, the health benefits, which I think are kind of self-explanatory, of being in nature, grounding yourself, eating well, like doing these things that build you up as a human person. Because that's another mark of the postmodern time period is the fragmentation. So the artwork too, it's always like fragmented. It's always just a mess because that is reflecting how we feel as human beings. Part of the antidote is to slow down, disconnect, like detach from the technology for the sake of reintegration, for us to be human again.
That is very well said, especially about this point of nuance. I mean, I think I was a history teacher for one semester, and so I got to think a lot about, well, like, how would I teach this? How would I teach Andrew Jackson? Like, what do most people know about Andrew Jackson? He caused a recession, and he caused the Trail of Tears. But this sort of, well, we're not even doing history if we just sort of think, like, in these sorts of very shallow, this person is good, Sojourner Truth, pure saint, and, Andrew Jackson, and, Hamilton and others, pure evil. That's not even history, because there isn't this sort of nuance. I'm curious, I guess there are kind of like two more questions on this sort of practical element. One of which is there a sort of a, this is conservative conversation, so is there a postmodern conservatism or a conservatism of the right that could be maybe not an avenue of recovery, but something to sort of look out for or look at as, like, I guess, one response to postmodernism?
I think so. Trying to beat postmodernism at its game is like playing chess with water. This is why when you approach it with logic, they're not looking for logic. Like, they're not playing the same game. And it's all about emotion. It's all about shouting down. It's all about my truth, my subjectivism. So it's very shallow. And I think there is, from the conservative standpoint, it's simply, again, you think about what are we trying to conserve? And I see the rise, for instance, in classical education as a big indicator to people that are hungry for more, parents that are hungry for my children to have a culture they believe in, to be proud of what Western civilization has handed us. So, and again, looking at narratives and storytelling, and we have to tell the story well. Why should anyone subscribe to this thinking that Western civilization is good, that the heroes of the past, as flawed as they are still worth honoring, and their texts still worth reading? So I think great books, programs, classical education is making a comeback for a reason. That, and not to beat a dead horse, but I think just showing young people the art and architecture of old and of now, and then challenging and saying, what do you want to reclaim? You can take some of what's been handed to us, including in postmodernity, and see the ache, see the angst, and realize people want beauty. They want something more than this. So can you even use some of the digital tools? You know, designers and people that know their way around some of the new animation programs. Let's make art beautiful, and let's lead with that.
Okay, and then one other sort of question is this sort of question of return. Can we go back? Can we turn back the clock? I think at the outset you said, kind of alluded to, like, no, we can't really go back. Um, why not? And how do we, I guess then the question, if we can't, yeah, so why not? And then how about we just start with why not? And then I'll come up with the follow-up. There's something I want to get to there, but I'm not entirely sure what it is right now. So,
Well, we can't go back just because time travel doesn't work the way it does in some of our favorite movies. It's not a linear line. It's more like a flip book where the present is always overlapping onto the past. And this is the moment we're in. This is the moment we've been handed. And you have people that will romanticize, like, oh, if we could only go back to the 1700s, or if only we could go back to, like in the Catholic circles, you'll hear like, oh, if only we could go back before Vatican II in the 1960s, then everything would be fine. It's like, listen, we had problems then. Like, we have problems certainly back in the 18th century. So I don't think anyone wants to give up air conditioning and the internet and deodorant. So how about we stay put and realize we can't go back, but we can reclaim some of these ideas, these texts that also aren't going anywhere. Just because the government declares something, or just because these philosophers declare something, it does not make it so. And some of these ideas, they just kind of infect the waters, and they have to run their course. I remember years ago when the Obergefell decision was made regarding gay marriage, and there was a professor I know who said, he was prophetic in this way. He said, I think marriage is just going to have to continue to be warped and reshaped until anything goes. And then you're going to have man and woman standing there in the ashes again. Like, the government could say, like, the sky is green. It's like, that's great. It does not change the nature of the thing. And so, like, we can't go backwards, but there is a sense of, like, as nature will overtake the ruins of old, to quote Jeff Goldblum in Jurassic Park, life finds a way. So there is always reason for hope. There is always reason to, yeah, we can't go back, but we can just point out, like, hey, so some of these ideas that are running amok, let's look at their fruit. Is it actually leading to a better culture and civilization and people of sound mind and body? Like, maybe not. Like, we can kind of point to it by its fruits and say now, and then have also, like, the courage and the knowledge to offer the alternative. Like, actually, now it's like conservatism being kind of the rebellious thing to do. So to be not afraid, one of my personal heroes, Pope John Paul II, that was one of his monikers, was be not afraid. Is that there's plenty of reasons to despair or kick the can, and maybe someone else will do something or make the change. It's like, be not afraid. Even if it's only one person you're having some kind of charitable conversation with, or you feel called to create a piece of artwork and don't know who's going to see it, like, we'll make it anyway. Like, put that effort in. Share that again, like, one of the goods of postmodernity is, in a way, the emphasis on narrative, on the subjective experience. Share your experience, because also people can't invalidate that and use it to lead people to what is true.
I don't know what my follow-up would be to that, but that makes a lot of sense to me. We're basically, I think, coming to the end, but I have one more question for you about a different book, about video gaming and the heroic life. You wrote this a couple of years ago, I think. And as someone who spent most of his teenage years, I would say wasting a lot of it, not all of it, but a lot of it on playing video games. I'd love to hear what your take is on how to game in pursuit of the good. Is this more about avoiding certain pitfalls, or is there like, or certain games, we have to stay away from that are, not ordered to the good, or is it there a certain mode of a certain mentality or a mode of playing video games in a way that is, leads one to greatness?
Yeah, so this book was a delight to write. It's Gaming in the Heroic Life with Ave Maria Press. And it is my journey growing up playing video games, and very much their evolution happening with my development from 16 bits to 64 bits to, the thousands we have today. And seeing the storytelling change, the maturing of games, the evolution from just neighborhood play of GoldenEye or Mario Kart to now you can play with people around the world. And so, like, the question of, like, taking video games seriously, like, could I be a disciple of Christ and continue to enjoy video games? Some people have a Puritan kind of just a hard stop, like, no, they're a waste of time. Everything gets equated with Mortal Kombat or Grand Theft Auto, and then kind of a laissez-faire, anything goes attitude. And I was trying to find the middle. Like, what is the virtuous middle here? We can honor the medium. The medium's not the enemy. Like, the book, the movie is not the enemy. But we know, like, there's also some bad content out there. Sometimes it's just the time. It's not prudent for your state in life to be pouring so much time into the games. But they're not bad in and of themselves. And in fact, they tap into... So again, why are some of our churches empty, but the video game lobbies are full? It's like, well, this is where people, young people especially, feel like I have a mission, I have a clear purpose, I have community. Like, there's a squad I regularly connect with, and it's the bowling leagues of today, like, is the Fortnite lobby, and where we're mostly there to goof around, but where you have occasional real conversations happen and meaningful relationships that build over years. Again, sometimes from around the world, but also too, and this, see, we could do another hour on this easy, but where there's beauty, not just graphics, but the music, the gameplay itself. Like, the ache for beauty has to go somewhere. And so for a lot of people, it is in modern video games, which are gorgeous today. And not just visually, graphically gorgeous, but cinematically, the stories they tell, the music, like the YouTube videos that are just 3 hours of a soundtrack on loop that I will listen to when I work. And so, yeah, my journey with the book was kind of writing it to my own 17-year-old self. And also parents out there who have questions and have different hangups or beliefs about video games. Like, I do kind of devote a later chapter to the pitfalls that many of us that know, that are out there. But I didn't want to come at it from a demonizing angle. It's to honor the medium and call people to, yeah, like, even in video games, there's a purpose here I'm seeking. And some of it is just amusement. Some of it is community. Some of it is that solo adventure tapping into, I want to be a hero. And I end the book with the example of Blessed Carlo Acutis, who this summer will be named Saint Carlo Acutis, who is the first millennial on the way to sainthood in the Catholic Church. He died in 2005, and he played video games. So we have the first canonized saint coming up who enjoyed video games, but also knew how to regulate them and integrate them with the whole of his life, not become so obsessed that it controlled him, but knew how to use the medium and also keep first things first.
Well, that's really well said, and makes me feel better about some of my high school years, though not all of them still, because some of it was the imprudence. But it was not the times that I was playing with my friends that I regret, but the time spent alone, the times with your friends. That's what you were talking about, the community, or that sort of like third space where but that's just maybe my dad when he was a kid he'd go out in the yard, but we're on our computers, and it's just a different sort of thing. But Bobby, thanks so much for coming on. Enjoyed chatting with you. If people want to find more of your work, where would you direct them to?
Sure. So the book, the brand new book, is the Postmodern Predicament, which is available from Sophia Institute Press. You can go to sophiainstitute.com or on Amazon. My website is jackieandbobby.com, which is the ministry landing page for my wife and I, our ministries, our videos, and our blogs. And then I'm on Instagram at bobby.angel. Feel free to reach out if I'm happy to connect.
Well, fantastic. Thanks again.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to Conservative Conversations with ISI. If you've enjoyed this episode, be sure to check out our website at isi.org/resources to see all that we offer our members, including the Intercollegiate Review, select modern age articles, debates, lectures, and of course, this podcast. Thanks again for listening. Don't forget to rate and review, and we will see you next time on Conservative Conversations with ISI.